This is St. Louis on the Air from St. Louis Public Radio. I'm Elaine Cha. Whether you see it from your windows or hear or feel it under tires or under your feet, there's still a whole lot of snow and, more perilously, ice across the St. Louis region. There are also a slew of questions people have because of personal experiences, being snowed in, having cars stuck on streets that are unplowed and unsalted, dealing with overflowing trash bins, and having COVID flashbacks with kids at home instead of at school. So today, we'll be talking about all that, and we'll be taking your calls later this hour and your emails too. How have you navigated challenges around snow and ice so far? Have you seen examples of folks working together to overcome them? We'll be taking your calls and also your emails a little later. The number to call will be 314-382-8255. That's 314-382-TALK. And send those emails our way at talk@stlpr.org. But first, yesterday afternoon, the Public Infrastructure and Utilities Committee for the City of St. Louis met to share information with city officials and the public wanting to learn more about the process of planning for winter storms and treating roadways. The director of St. Louis' Streets Department, Bethany Williams, kicked the meeting off by giving credit to the workers who've been doing their best to make the roads passable and sharing the routine of caring for streets after winter weather. Here's a bit of what Williams presented.
Normally, we wait until we see about a little less than a half of inch of snow on the ground, so we have something to plow. And that is when we're moving into plowing our arterial roads. And how do we look at those pavements? I think that's what's really important here and important for people to understand. When we talk about the street has been plowed, it's passable. That does not mean that you can see black pavement from curb to curb. That means that there is a passable lane that cars can travel in that space. And so when we look at how do we plow, our first round is to make sure that it's passable. During the snow, we just want to push as much of the snow as possible. And from there, we're wanting to make a passable lane. Once the snow stops, then that's when we really start pushing and making sure that we're getting as much of the snow off. In this last storm, that is when we really were able to start treating, because once the rain stopped, we were able to put treatment down, put salt down in order to help us activate and plow the primary and secondary streets.
That was Bethany Williams, director of the Streets Department for the City of St. Louis. She shared a presentation before the Public Infrastructure and Utilities Committee and concerned citizens yesterday about the roadways at City Hall. Joining me in studio to talk about what they saw and heard of that public meeting are two of my STLPR colleagues. First, we have Lucretia Wimbley. Lucretia is a reporter here at St. Louis Public Radio. Lucretia, welcome back to the show.
Hi, Elaine. Happy to be here.
We're also joined by Danny Wysentowski, a producer for St. Louis on the Air, and one of the online viewers watching yesterday's meeting. Welcome back, Danny.
Thanks, Elaine. It's ice to be here.
Yes, it is ice to be here. Now, we just played 1 minute of the committee meeting, which ran for nearly 2 hours. And in that time, Alderman and Public Infrastructure and Utility Committee members Ann Schweitzer, Daniela Velasquez, Laura Keyes, Joseph Vollmer, and Michael Browning, they asked questions on behalf of their constituents. And there was also a public comments portion that gave city residents a way to share their own stories of how they've been dealing with the icy roads and pose questions that they have for the city. Now, Lucretia, you had planned to go to that meeting in person. What changed your decision about that?
Yeah, for sure. Well, obviously the roads. My tires are not in the best condition. I'm sure I'm not the only person who's dealing with that issue right now, but it is just not safe for me to get out there when I don't have to. I could have taken an Uber or something, but judging that I could have watched this.
And Danny's actually familiar with that because you had to take an Uber or Lyft here to work, right?
That's right. My car had been iced in for more than a week, and despite my best attempts to dig it out, even when it got a bit warmer, it really was just cupped in this, a slippery, jail. And it didn't feel safe to gun the engine. It didn't feel like I can get out of here. I live on a side street. And so me, like a lot of people, our cars have just been sitting there, and we've just been slipping around and walking, or it feels a little conflicted to ask a Lyft driver or an Uber. And so I actually had to walk to a place that felt safer. And so there's all these kind of negotiations that we as residents and people who are just looking at our environment are making. And we're making all of these decisions hoping to keep ourselves safe. And we're also wondering, where are the trucks?
Right.
Why is this on us?
And so how much of what Danny has just shared, Lucretia, were you hearing in that public meeting? What were you seeing as you were watching it live through the live stream?
Sure, yeah. Well, everybody, a lot of people are frustrated, to say the least. Just adding to what Danny said, a lot of people expressed frustration and just felt like the city was making excuses. Also by making an excuse saying that, historically we don't plow or salt residential or side streets, but residents and some aldermen pretty much called the city out on that and said that's not an excuse because the streets haven't historically gotten smaller. So it's like...
Right,
yeah.
right. What were maybe one or two of the concerns that you heard from committee members and citizens in attendance that sort of stood out to you?
Yeah, one of the things that, definitely stood out was the Ward 4 alderman, Brett Narayan. He pretty much hammered the city about his ward, which, according to him, is one of the wards in the city that has the highest or the most amount of hills. And, the city has shared that hill routes are one of their priorities. But Narayan pretty much hammered them and, told them that it was unacceptable. He himself has been snowed in since the storm first hit on January 4th. And so, yeah, he said that he's been hearing from a lot of his constituents that they're unable to get groceries. He's been getting calls, emails about not being able to get groceries, but also not being able to get their medicine, just not having access to transportation.
Right, right. And there were aldermen there like Brett Narayan who are not committee members, but they were there to rep their people, right? Danny, how about you? You were watching this meeting virtually. Producer Maya Norfleet and I were also watching it via live stream, as you and Lucretia were. We saw that there were 426 viewers, and that's significantly more than any of the city's most recent meetings. What is it that you saw in the comments in the live chat that sort of align with what we've been talking about so far?
I think there's probably always a limited amount of insight you can gain from YouTube comments. I think just in a general term.
Sure.
I think that there's a lot of anger. There's a lot of people who are using that opportunity to make political statements about Tashara Jones, the mayor, the operations of the city. But to take a step back, I've watched a lot of city hearings. I've been to the Board of Aldermen, these virtual meetings, and very often you do get a sense of the disconnect on an issue. You have a police chief saying, this is what we're doing for public safety, and someone in the audience says, well, I've been a victim of violence. I'm not seeing these patrols. Economic development saying we're going to make all this money for the city, and someone says, I'm not seeing this. And what was really interesting about the meeting yesterday is you saw that disconnect actually happening within the Board of Aldermen officials themselves, especially with Alderman Narayan. You had Bethany Williams give this very measured, very informed presentation. She went through, this is the streets we go to, residentials, these arterial ones, and it all felt very systemic, like there was a plan, and yet the people who were saying, I'm not seeing any of this plan, were the actual Board of Aldermen themselves. I'm snowed in. I'm not seeing these trucks. We're not seeing a sort of relationship between the words that are coming out of our officials and what's happening on the streets. And I think what is also always just remarkable is to see that from our officials and not from the public, who very often are making that point of explaining the way that policies aren't actually affecting folks on the ground. And that is just now happening for everybody.
Yeah. Now, there were figures that Director of Streets Bethany Williams shared in her presentation, which, Danny, you've characterized as being very measured. She was answering a lot of questions, I think, even before they were coming up.
She was definitely under a lot of pressure. I think she clearly, I think, made some preparation into really trying to bring folks into what the plan is supposed to be.
Now, some of the numbers that she shared had to do with the number of lane miles of road. She said there are 4,230 miles of that, and of that, 1,920 are on snow routes. She talked about the number of routes that are serviced, the number of bridges that were maintained, and how the storm that started on January 4th and has lasted for 11 days, there were 50 plow trucks and 53 employees who were working 12 shifts initially. Those employees are now on 8-hour shifts, and they need to clear an average of 10.6 inches of snow. Among those figures, Lucretia, was there anything that surprised you?
Not really at this point. And I say that just because, like you just mentioned, and we've been talking about here, it's been 11 days since the snow came, and also the fact that it's not like we were blindsided by the snow. And so anyway, I just can't say I'm surprised. And it's not just because of those things I just mentioned, but also unfortunately the city has a history of lagging on certain things. And so this just unfortunately wasn't surprising to me. But I was kind of surprised to see how much Bethany was willing to share about the numbers and what they were. But she was able to tell, even though ultimately it was just that we're doing the best we can, we're understaffed, and we'll get to your streets when we can.
Right. Danny, how about you? I mean, did any of those numbers help you to understand a little bit better? Like, did it give you a sense of empathy with what the city is dealing with?
One of the things that is just really remarkable is this kind of gamble in policy that takes place of how much salt do we stockpile? How many trucks do we send out? Do we hold back some of that salt for another storm? Or have we gone through a series of mild winters, leaving us with too much? Maybe those resources are best used elsewhere. I think we're still in the process of seeing, I think, the way that these different variables have all really played out in just the worst way possible, where we the city was expecting, after a number of mild winters, let's shift those funds to something to do other projects, other funding. That sounds like a great idea, unless you're hammered with 2 weeks of an ice storm and you're left without the resources to actually fully mobilize. There were some points, and again, to Alderman Narayan and other folks on the Board of Aldermen who were almost criticizing the basic city policies around, making reports to the Citizen Bureau, one by one. That was one of the things that Williams pointed out. Oh, we want to help these streets, make a report. And we had one of Alderman Narayan saying, this can't be the way that a city of this size works, going one by one. I'll just put a report in for every street.
Exactly,
which got kind of a laugh. But this whole thing does have somewhat of a feeling of absurdity, where either it sounds like we're describing a much smaller city, or we're describing a city of hundreds of thousands of people that has always experienced winter, that has had tough winters in the past, and yet can't seem to figure out that balance of how do we equip, how do we prepare, and when do we shift those resources? And I think there was a lot of dissatisfaction in a lot of the remarks of saying, oh, we're going to bring forestry trucks in. Oh, we've got other folks coming. But we've also cut down from 12 to 8 hours a day when a lot of these streets are still shut down. And so there really was a strong thread of running tension of trying to figure out, was this a bad plan? Were we badly equipped? Or is this a type of weather, inches and inches of ice is something that we as a society can be shut down by. We are not strong enough to mobilize against that if we're not doing the right things right off the bat. Maybe this is just the strength of this weather system. And it didn't really feel like we settled on a single explanation. And so there was still a lot of frustration left at the end.
Yeah. We heard from Nick on Facebook, who wrote, I sure hope the city officials find the people responsible for the lack of staff and equipment. Before we go to a quick break, I would like to invite you to the conversation. How did you manage the snow and the delays and what many are characterizing as the underwhelming snow response? Give us a call at 314-382-8255. That's 382-TALK. Or you can email us at stlpr.org. As we said, we'll take a short break here and we'll be back to continue this conversation. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio. Welcome back. I'm Elaine Shaw, and I'm here with STLPR colleagues Lucretia Wimbley and Danny Wysentowski, and we're talking about the different varying ways that cities and municipalities, the way that counties also have responded to the latest snowfall and icy roads. Before the break, we were talking about the different things that have been done by government, and some of the things that people also have been doing in order to deal with what is happening. And we want to hear more about that from you. What have your experiences been in navigating the challenges around all the snow and ice? Give us a call at 314-382-8255. That's 314-382-TALK. Or you can email us at talk@stlpr.org. Now, here, St. Louis Public Radio, we broadcast in Rolla as well as in Quincy. And to the point about Rolla, there have been some conditions that they've been needing to deal with as well. So joining us in studio is St. Louis Public Radio's interim managing editor and Rolla correspondent, Jonathan Ahl. Jonathan, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Elaine.
So what is it that is unique about the region in and around Rolla that folks should understand about the response to this kind of winter weather?
Sure. So I've spent 2 days this week and 2 days last week in St. Louis and the rest of my time in Rolla, so it's been really interesting to see the compare and contrast. Rolla streets got cleaned better, and they got cleaned faster, and it got done better. However, one of the interesting things is that Rolla was still off of school. Rolla Public Schools were not in session at all last week, not a single day. And it's not because you couldn't get around in Rolla. It's because a lot of those bus routes go into rural areas. And the rural areas around Rolla were not getting serviced. Some of those roads are very narrow. Some of them are gravel. A lot of them are very, very hilly. So the situation in Rolla was you could get around town pretty much unabated very, very quickly. The downside, though, was that schools were still out because some of those bus routes couldn't get into those rural areas. So much so that even on Monday, when schools were back in, Rolla Public Schools told parents, your bus route might not be able to get to your stop, and you'll be contacted if we can't get a bus to you. Mm-hmm. So even more than a week out, they were saying we might not be able to get to your location.
Mm-hmm. To what extent were folks in Rolla familiar with that kind of a situation?
It happens every time there's any snow. I mean, Rolla Public Schools is very quick to cancel school because they do go to make sure that if they can't get every kid to school, they tend to just cancel school. Mm-hmm. So that is definitely the attitude. So that wasn't new for the folks that live there.
Well, that's good perspective on what's been happening in Rolla. Jonathan Ahl is St. Louis Public Radio's interim managing editor and Rolla correspondent. And speaking of schools, every superintendent had to make some quick decisions due to that winter weather and the ability of streets departments to respond, especially right after winter break. The superintendent of the School District of University City, Sharonica Hardin-Bartley, shared with us how she made the decision to close her district.
It's never an easy decision, first of all, and we looked at, of course, weather, any type of accumulation of snow, ice, is always problematic. We look at temperature, if it's below a certain threshold. We also look at the timing of the incident. So if it comes in the day before, and the cleaning crews, street crews have time to treat the roads, or if it comes in the morning. So those are factors that we consider. We also consider what other districts are doing in proximity. So we have a call or a Zoom meeting that is managed by Kevin Carl, who is the superintendent of Hancock Place. So all of the superintendents in St. Louis County participate, and we try to have some sort of consistency as much as possible, but we also understand that geographically our spaces could be very different.
That was Sharonica Hardin-Bartley, the superintendent of the school district of University City. And on that topic of schools, we have Mark, who's calling from Ladue. Mark, welcome to St. Louis on the Air.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. Love the show. Love NPR.
Okay, great. Go ahead. What is your comment?
Yeah, so we, live in Ladue, and there's sidewalks there, and our kids and a lot of other kids walk to school as a matter of getting back and forth. And the school sent out an email saying, make sure kids walk on the sidewalk, be safe, don't walk in the roads. However, the plows push all of the snow onto the sidewalks. In fact, putting more snow and ice that fell, and so they turn them effectively into snowbanks, and no one can walk on it. And so I called the city, and they said they agreed it was their responsibility, they should clear it, but they simply have no way to do it, no equipment, no tools, and the plan was just to let it melt. But with all of the temperatures, continuing to be cold, he had no timeline, no outlook, or any advice on anything else to do. So I'm just wondering, there must be a better way to keep the sidewalks cleared for people who want to, use the sidewalks for exercise or, getting back and forth to school. But feeling some frustration there.
Right. Thank you, Mark. And this thing about sidewalks actually reminds me of something that came up during that City of St. Louis public meeting. And what is it, Lucretia, that you heard about sidewalks?
Sure. Well, the director of streets, Bethany Williams, pretty much said that it's not she wanted to, debunk the myth or misinformation that's been circulating in the community. But she pretty much said that the city is not responsible for, removing snow and ice from particularly business and residential sidewalks.
Areas, right. Yeah. And Danny, what have the sidewalks looked like where you are?
I'll let you know when I see him again, because it has been a while since I've seen the sidewalks on my street. I live on a side street. I live on, in South City, St. Louis. It is a narrow street. It is a long one-way street, more than a half mile long. So this isn't even just a normal city block, but a lot of these streets have unusual dimensions, don't have easy access for large trucks, and are already difficult places to navigate in the best circumstances. I think there was a lot of discussion over should there just be repositories of salt that neighbors can use. And I think former Alderman Joe Vollmer, if I remember right, discussed that was the case in the 70s and 80s, but neighbors just ended up using it for themselves. A lot of this has to do with, I think, the balance of how a community and neighbors look out for themselves, what their expectations of the city can be. And I think we are seeing a breakdown in a lot of that with this amount of snow and ice. With that being said, I have seen a lot of neighbors help each other out. I've seen a lot of folks pushing cars. My own neighbor shoveled my sidewalk without asking me. Very, very nice of him. But that is not rare, and I think people are seeing the moments where they can step up. The people who have prepared for this, who have held on to salt, who have good shovels, who have good boots and are have the time, they're going out. They're looking for cars to help. They're looking for people. And I think that is inspiring. It shows us sort of the connective tissue of a city and a community. But I think these questions do stay there, because I think we wonder if we had really planned for this weeks beforehand, if we had put the time in, had the equipment ready, had the people ready. And now we're still looking at these, can we put salt or equipment on forestry trucks? Can we repurpose other things we have? And it just feels odd for, again, a city of this size and these resources, where it feels like we're looking through the back of our closet looking for another, snowplow or tow truck.
Right.
There's an odd feeling to this that a lot of people are reckoning with.
And we are talking, of course, about not only the city, but also the county Mark was calling from.
Absolutely.
Ladue. And Joe Vollmer is the person who represents Ward 5 currently. Speaking of the past, Danny, you had mentioned that. We have Susan, who's on the line from St. Louis. Susan, welcome.
So I've been living in the same location on a side street in the city of St. Louis for over 50 years, and I recall where our streets used to be plowed when there was snow. My question is, does anybody know when that stopped happening?
So when did that stop? Susan, I think that's a great question, a question that we can get some answers to.
So I don't have a specific answer of when this stopped, but I did look back to try to see the last major snowstorm where something similar happened. And there might have been another one in the interim, but 2011 is the year that really stood out to me.
Okay.
People were calling it Snowmageddon. This was, I think related to El Nino, but this was a situation where there was so much, ice in inches thick on the ground for more than a week, creating political pressure and problems for then Mayor Francis Slay. And he announced, and this was, more than a week after this weather effect had already been there, was saying, why wasn't there salt on the ground? Why weren't these trucks going down side streets? And he announced that they were going to send 50 trucks through residential and tertiary roads. They said they'd be plowing, spreading mixture, and that it would cost additional money. That this might put the city in a deficit for the amount of salt it might need for the next storm. So at least by 2011, this was already something where, very similar to what Bethany Williams was saying, you had the administration of Francis Slay describing it, we're only going on residential streets. We can't plow side streets. And even to a previous caller's point, dealing with this issue of plows actually pushing snow into other cars, blocking intersections, blocking them in. This was already an issue at that time, and that was, obviously almost 15 years ago. So this has been an issue, but it's one of those things that is punctuated by major, even catastrophic storms that themselves pose really serious issues with the amount of ice. And once that's there, you've just got to wait.
Right. We did get an email from someone. We got a message from Yvonne who says, I'm lucky enough to have been able to work from home all week. It's unbelievable to me that the roads are so dangerous. Why couldn't the city hire some folks with pickup trucks and plows on the front? Subcontract? Mind-blowing. We want to hear from you too. Give us a call at 314-382-8255. That's 314-382-TALK. And Denise has used that number. Denise calling from St. Louis County. Denise, welcome.
Hi.
Sure, go ahead. Hello.
Hi. Love NPR. And I agree with a lot of the comments made. St. Louis County, the city I know, is in terrible shape. The St. Louis County, though, they're still lacking too. There's a lot of subdivisions that are a mess. They did not plow. And even on the highways, entrance ramps, even just, the Rock Road, Tesson Ferry, all of a sudden your right lane's gone or your left lane's gone. Mm-hmm. And it's still happening. Why aren't they out there this week, trying to clear up some of that? I mean, it's just unbelievable.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for calling with that comment, Denise. And again, Denise called from 314-382-8255. Again, 314-382-TALK. Now, Danny, you had mentioned some of the best that people have seen out there. And I think that it's a thing that really stands out to me is those positives. Tatiana had written and said that she had a family emergency last Monday, and a neighbor helped dig a path and push the car out of its spot. Our block in Shaw is full of folks helping each other. And Katie also wrote to us, my neighbors asked if they could borrow my shovel because theirs broke. I put mine on the porch for them to snag, and when I looked out to see if they had returned it yet, they had shoveled our front steps and sidewalk as a thank you. So these are stories of people who have come together in order to overcome things that are not being taken care of, maybe by agencies or entities that they're expecting them to. Lucretia, in what ways have you maybe seen the best of humanity during this situation with the weather?
Yeah, similar to what you just mentioned. People have been helping each other. Some of my friends here in the city have been telling me about how all of their stories about how they've been having to pull over because they would pull over, but they would get stuck on the roads and then be with other people that were stuck and they were helping each other get unstuck. So yeah, I've definitely heard stories and I've seen people out at the grocery stores like just shoveling around the building. But I personally tried to stay indoors as much as possible for the reasons I mentioned earlier about my tires not being great. So,
and I've seen it as well in my own neighborhood. We have some folks or on our street, that is, who are a little older, and they could not get out to shovel, especially when the snow became really heavy. There was just no way they could do it. So another neighbor who has a snow blower came in and helped out with that. Now, we have also part of our listening area, the Metro East. And joining us in studio is executive producer Alex Hoyer. Welcome to your own show, Alex.
Thank you. As Danny said, it's nice to be here as well.
Yes. Now, our Metro East correspondent, Will Bauer, got what he called a shady comment from the office of Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker about clearing roads. It reads in part, quote, "We've been seeing a lot of reports of the difference in snow clearing in southwestern Illinois versus Missouri, which speaks to the investments made by Governor Pritzker in the Illinois Department of Transportation and in our roads." Unquote. So, Alex, of our St. Louis on the Air team, you bring many things that are valuable. And one of them is that you're a resident of the Metro East. So given what you know about Illinois and Missouri, I mean, do you find this statement by Governor Pritzker to be shady or is it fair?
I think it is absolutely fair and accurate. I've ever since kindergarten, I grew up in the Metro East, and it is still true to this day, but there is always a difference when you cross the bridge into Missouri from Illinois. And by and large, I have always experienced it to be the case that IDOT does a better job than MoDOT generally in clearing its roads, and that the roads in Metro East communities are better than the roads on the Missouri side, specifically in the city of St. Louis. Now I live in Swansea, which is in between Belleville and Fairview Heights, and the roads were cleared. And if I had to give a grade for it, I'd give the city crews a B+. The biggest complaint that we had was that when the snow plows came through, that they would build up the snow at the end of the driveway, and that's tough to shovel.
Yes, it is.
But I'm thinking about that complaint, and I'm overall pleased that we had roads to drive on. I mean, it's kind of that trade-off. You either have the mound of snow at the end of the driveway that you have to clear, or you don't have streets that you can really drive on, and I would much prefer the former.
So, Alex, the biggest difference then, what do you think, what would you say it is along that commute? Like, give us sort of a visual. Is there a particular place that you drive? And also, you navigate South St. Louis City on a pretty regular basis.
Sure. Yeah, my wife works in South St. Louis and at a piano studio there and is just describing the conditions, and I have to go to pick up the kids later there, and she was giving me the special route that I should go, and so I should not go down Magnolia, but off of Grand. I should instead turn down Sydney and then go on Compton, and so it's like a very specific labyrinth of streets, which is what a lot of people are experiencing. Like I don't have to tell people that they have probably planned out their own snow routes to get around the city. But I would say, so the storm happened 11 days ago or so, that on the Saturday before I was in Belleville, and it was late morning, and I could see the city trucks. They're already putting some kind of liquid down on the streets to pre-treat. They were putting down salt, and so they were clearly getting ahead of the storm. And so perhaps, and I imagine so, that pre-treatment before the storm arrives is a big deal as to how city trucks and plows can later respond.
Mm-hmm. Alex Hoyer is the executive producer of St. Louis on the Air and a resident of the land of Lincoln out there in Swansea. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. And I should just point out that I did not request to be on this show. I was asked to be on the show.
And for good reason. I'd like to invite you to the conversation as well. How is it that you've managed the snow with delays, differences in snow response from your local streets departments? Give us a call at 314-382-8255. That's 382-TALK, or send us an email at talk@stlpr.org. We're not done with this conversation. We're going to get to something that is my favorite, which is solutions. So stay close and stay tuned. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio. Welcome back. Let's return to our conversation about snow response, snow and ice lately. And I'm here with my colleagues, STLPR's Lucretia Wimbley and Danny Wissentowski. We've been taking your calls too, and we have Diane on the line who's calling from St. Louis County. Diane, welcome to St. Louis on the Air.
Thank you. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure, go ahead.
Mine's more of an observation, because living in the county, I have wonderful neighbors who dig me out because I don't walk well. So on the ice, I don't go out at all. But anyway, I just had to buy a new car, and I had to buy my car based on the width of the car because I have a one-car garage. Mm-hmm. And it seems to me that the American cars are getting bigger and bigger, so that's probably why the city streets are getting smaller and smaller.
No, that is a good point. So it's not just about the structures that exist, but also the things that are being built now. Diane, what car did you end up buying?
I ended up getting a Toyota Corolla Cross.
Okay.
Because it was 2 inches wider than my old car, which was a Honda.
Okay.
And I looked at the Fords, and it wouldn't fit my garage, so I couldn't buy it.
The American cars, that is very interesting. Diane, thank you for calling. And I'm glad to hear that you have neighbors who are kind of looking after your interests too. Danny, you have something?
Yeah, this notion of like the size of our cars and the size of our infrastructure and what our streets were built to accommodate. I think this weather situation really brings these tensions into such a greater focus. My own street, in the short amount of time I've actually been able to drive on it, I am going in the wheel ruts of the somewhat larger cars that I've been driving. But a lot of those larger cars are now parked a little bit further off the curb. And because if you're driving in these sort of icy ruts, I'm just feeling my car jerked from side to side. And there were moments where another large truck, which had done the best it could to park, but I was convinced that I was going to get lurched right into the back of its bumper without any control that I have. And I think this is one of those pieces to reflect on, is that there are a bunch of very large work semi-trucks that a lot of people use professionally, or just, that's their choice. And we do feel squeezed out a little bit on our own streets, even when, I'm going down the same rut that they've left.
Right.
And so I definitely hear Diane's point. And we, unfortunately, just can't shrink our neighbors' cars even when we want to.
Mm-hmm. And on that note of large vehicles, Michael is calling from Olivet. Michael, welcome to St. Louis on the Air.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Hi, yeah, I do deliveries also in the city, so I've definitely noticed that there's times where, some of the streets are plowed and you cross the street and some of them aren't. And I was just doing a delivery to the St. Louis plow, where they keep all the plows, and half of the plows are still in there not plowing anything. So it seems like they definitely have the equipment, despite saying they don't have the equipment. So yeah, it's just like an observation.
And have you driven in these kinds of conditions in the past, Michael, be it locally or elsewhere?
I mean, growing up in the country, I drove in these conditions, but I was out in the country. You'd think for the city they would have sprayed some salt down ahead of time and have their game together.
Right. Now, thank you so much for calling, Michael. So these considerations about not only people not being able to get out to work, but if they are driving larger vehicles, that's something to think about as well. And I had said as we were going to the break earlier that solutions is something that I am always very interested in talking about. And there have been some positives, right? Gwendolyn wrote to us and said that she wants to do a shout out to the good people working at Shaw's Coffee. They helped push my car out of a parking spot when my tire was stuck last week. And we also heard from Jennifer. Jennifer said, myself and a couple other people waiting for the hockey shuttle helped to get an Amazon delivery driver moving again. She was just spinning her tires in the ice. So these kinds of things that people are taking on for themselves, measures that can be taken by private residents. I want to get to what the responsibilities are of people who are business owners, and the extent to which that was something that came up. Lucretia, you did mention that about the public hearing. What exactly was it that you were hearing, not only from Bethany Williams, but maybe some of the suggestions coming from people who gave public comment?
Yeah. People are frustrated because I think Danny mentioned it, or some of the callers mentioned it too, but the issue of the city pushing the streets that they have been plowing, pushing those big piles and mounds of snow off onto the sidewalks. It's on residential streets and businesses, in business areas too. But just a lot of people were pretty much just frustrated with that and saying, like, can the city not provide any sort of help with this? And like you mentioned and touched on earlier, Bethany Williams, the streets director, did say that technically it is not the city's responsibility to clear residential and business sidewalks, but city residents are pretty much frustrated with that. I mean, and naturally and rightfully so. Like, okay, what can you do to help us then?
Right. Now, another positive note that we did get came from the lead meteorologist here, the National Weather Service of St. Louis, Matt Beitscher, and he shared that he's glad that citizens really heeded the forecast and stayed off the roads. Sometimes people do not listen to those kinds of warnings. So although folks may have been stuck for reasons that have to do with snow clearance, things could also have been much worse had folks not been listening. Now, one of the things that Bethany Williams had added had to do with communication that goes out to residents. Each of you, Lucretia and Danny, you live in the city. What do you recall of comms that went out maybe about where to park, where not to park, how you as citizens could do something to make it easier for plows to come through or for salting to happen?
I didn't get any update at all on that, to my knowledge, outside of the weather alerts. And I think part of what I think about with the hearing and some of the disconnect that we kept hearing is the real struggle in terms of equipment and hiring and even things like signs. Getting signs to tell snowplows where speed bumps are. There was a comment from, I think, one of the alder persons that was taking a year. And Bethany Williams responded, well, we do need those signs there to tell our snowplows where those bumps are. My street has a speed bump without a sign on it. So not only is it too small for the trucks, but it might not even be ready to be safely serviced in that way. To my understanding, the city has, like with its fleet of trash vehicles, is really trying to repair and revive its fleet and its employees. And that takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of money. The ARPA funds are also involved in terms of waiting for things. And this has just sort of happened in a place where these things are just not in place yet. And, just as a sort of related subject, this is not just happening in St. Louis, but on the state level as well. Ryan Krull at St. Louis Magazine reported this week that a lawsuit, happening within the Missouri Department of Transportation and in conflict with some policies from former Governor Mike Parson, they had been trying to use the $60 million in their own fund to hire more people. And the state essentially sued the Department of Transportation to say, no, you can't use that money to hire folks. And in part, the conditions we're seeing now is also the struggle to hire and the struggle to maintain this level of emergency services that is not happening in the city or state level.
Right. So lack of staffing is something that we're hearing in many ways throughout this conversation. Let's take a call from Linda, who's calling from Tower Grove South. Linda, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Hello. I wish I had solutions. I fortunately have not had to go very many places because I'm just really iced in. I did go out Wednesday for a moment in my car after scouting out the route that I was going to take by walking the neighborhood. And I was amazed at how poorly a lot of the other people are driving. Mm-hmm. I relate to what I don't know his name it was saying about the ruts, driving in other people's, in the ruts in the ice was helpful. But as soon as a car would be coming toward me or trying to make a turn toward me, you can't pull over because of the ice. But down Grand, people were driving crazy. Yeah. The people who naturally or these days run red lights and run stop signs were still doing it. I even saw one truck pull over to the right and go over the big hills of ice and snow that the plows had plowed just so he could get like 2 car lengths ahead.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to influence people to drive safely.
Those kinds of habits, driving habits. Thank you so much, Linda, for that. We also have Dennis, who is calling from St. Louis. Dennis, welcome.
Thank you. There ought to be a political advantage for mayors and snowstorms. I remember when Jane Byrne, mayor of Chicago, lost a snowstorm, a far more massive snowstorm than this back in 1967. Next year, she lost her job. I think the same thing might apply to Shwara Jones. And I say the adage is, lose your snowstorm, lose your job.
Right. Well, this will certainly be a test, especially in this year where an election will be happening. Thank you. We heard from Pat in Franklin County, who called in to add a reminder that taxes pay for infrastructure. So cutting taxes cuts services. Sarah is calling from Crestwood. Sarah, what is your point? Quickly?
Yeah, I just wanted to say Crestwood actually did a really great job of clearing all the snow from the streets. Our subdivision is complete. It's been completely clear really the whole time. And so I was just wondering what the difference was between Crestwood and some of the other neighborhoods I've driven through. Webster, Kirkwood certainly have not done as good of a job, it seems, on the side streets. Mm-hmm. So that was just the point I wanted to make. So shout out to Crestwood.
Thank you. And I think that does get to something about disparities across the region. Where's the cleanup happening and where is it not? And Pam from Ellisville also had called in to say that Ellisville did a fantastic job of cleaning the streets. So in our last minute or so, given what the situation is now and that there's going to be more sort of ups and downs with the temperatures, what are you hoping to see, Lucretia, over the next several days?
As a fellow Southerner from Mississippi, I'm hoping to see no more snow and ice on these streets. And yeah, just pretty much that. Just hoping that the snow can melt. But, temperatures are supposed to be dropping, especially on Sunday and next week into the 20s and I think the 10s and below that even. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, naturally, I'm just hoping that the ice will all melt.
And Danny, what is the thing that you were going to be doing so that you're not stuck?
Part of it is we might not have a choice about being stuck. And being prepared for these things, not relying on deliveries, not putting other people potentially at risk, looking out for our neighbors, having enough stuff with us where we have to bug in, instead of bugging out, we can help ourselves and help others around us.
Danny Wysentowski and Lucretia Wimbley are my colleagues here at St. Louis Public Radio. Thank you for joining us today.
This episode was produced by Maya Norfleet.
Our audio engineer is Aaron Dorr. This podcast was mixed and edited by Aaron.
Our executive producer is Alex Hoyer.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations, and leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thank you.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.
The Gateway brings you the day's news each weekday from around the St. Louis region and the state capitals in Jefferson City.
Our schools are accredited. We don't need this bill.
And Springfield.
How many more years must pass before lawmakers see time is of the essence?
I'm Abby Larico. Join me each weekday for The Gateway on the STLPR app or wherever you get podcasts.